in a world where trauma is real, where people seek out distraction from their internal lives and relationships with others, and where no one is taught healthy self-care. Help was needed. In 2019, the mission began. Find a way to help people understand and better their mental health. Seek out ways to explore relationships and how they work. Fight against the stigmas that surround counseling and therapy. And, most importantly,
do all of that so you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. Hey everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me here in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. This week's guest is Lauren Russell. Lauren's a trauma-focused therapist in Nashville who's been in the field for 12 years and has a background in addiction, attachment, and sexual and developmental trauma. She offers somatic and experiential treatment options for adults of all backgrounds and orientations. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. I want you to go to the window, open it, stick your head out and yell, dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Lauren, how's it going?
It is going good. I'm hanging out. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for being just flexible and willing to do this remotely.
Yeah.
We're in, I don't know, let's see. I've got a countdown app on my phone. So for me, I've been social distancing for 21 days and 17 hours right now.
Oh, all right. You're brave to count. I have just ignored the counting because I don't want to. It's like, let me just check out.
My wife's been at it for a few more days because like she was in her office on a Friday and then never went back. I was in my office that Monday after that and saw clients in person.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was like, all right, I'm going to go mobile now.
Right. Yeah.
Since we're doing the social distancing thing, being able to record mobily is, or remotely, I should say, rather, like it's a great thing because it still allows conversations to happen. And I'm sure that you've switched to telehealth.
I have. Yeah. I've been doing telehealth, I guess, for 2 weeks. And then prior to that, I'd already had a week scheduled off because my kids were on spring break. So so for the past 2 weeks, it's been all telehealth. And, then, right before that was the tornado here in Nashville. So it's been a month of a whole lot.
Yeah, I was talking to a client today and he brought up the tornado.
Yeah.
And I had actually forgotten about it.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, what kind of crazy world do we live in that I have forgotten that a tornado tore through Nashville like 3 or 4 weeks ago? Right.
I know. It's wild. Like I think about it and it feels much longer than just a handful of weeks ago.
Yeah. So all that to say, thank you so much. But I like to start every conversation with just asking my guests, why therapy? Why is it that you do what you do?
Yeah, good question. So I've been working in the mental health field probably, I guess 12, 13 years now. And I would say I'll kind of like start with like the short version, then maybe like dabble into some of the parts of the other reasons why there, but I think I was always interested in the human psyche and just what made us do what we do as people, even from an early age. And I remember before I went into undergrad, I was always very artistic and knew I wanted to go to school for art or painting, but I always had a leaning towards art therapy. And so I remember even at 17, 18, researching ways that I could do that. And ultimately, I went into the art field, but always had a very heavy leaning towards psychology and just the workings of the mind. And that showed up in a lot of my artwork. But to kind of back up a little bit, I was in and out of therapy a lot as a teen. There was just a lot of chaos in the household growing up, and so for all the stuff, at least there was some foresight to get me some support around those things. And I remember I had some really terrible experiences and then a couple of really good experiences, and those
Like in therapy, like with a therapist?
yes, as a teen. In small town Mississippi, which had its own flavor of um, it's just its own flavor there. I'll say that. So yeah, I had a couple of just bad experiences with that. Walked out of a good, couple therapy offices, and then like I said, I had a couple that really made an impression on me and showed me what it was like to have someone align with you and to see you and witness where you were at and what that felt like. And I remember it just being one of the first times in my life that I experienced that, and how that shifted my whole internal paradigm on just my outlook on the world. My external circumstances didn't change much, but how I oriented from the inside out did. And it helped just gain strength to continue to move forward. But yeah, so in college, like I said, I did a lot of art, and that was my world at the time, and a lot of introspective creations happened there. But then after college, I moved to Nashville in 2008 and worked for a community mental health organization doing a lot of outreach services for folks who had severe and persistent mental illness. So that started that trajectory. And I knew ultimately I wanted to be a therapist in private practice that would allow me the flexibility and autonomy to do the type of healing work that I really wanted to do. But I'm so glad that I had that first decade of experience doing mostly agency work and just getting to know kind of the socio-political side of mental health in this country. The specific needs and just how it, oh gosh, there's so many intersectional pieces there. I wouldn't even know which one to travel down first, but ultimately here I am in private practice. I've been doing that for, it'll be 3 years coming up, and I really love it. So there's the
I think what's so interesting to me is I'm always curious with people who come on the show to know like what framework they had of therapy or therapists before they became one.
Yeah.
Because I think that like unless they had gone to therapy as a client, then it had to come it had to come from some presentation or representation. Like for me, I knew Fraser Crane from Cheers. Like I knew Billy Crystal in Analyze This and Analyze That. I knew Dr. Melfi from The Sopranos. And not all of those are like representations or characterizations of people that I would want to sit with
right
as a client,
Yeah.
And so really for me, like going to therapy as a client myself, I would have never in a million years thought I want to be a therapist until through my own therapy, I received, the gift of like transformation and growth through personal work.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's so admirable to hear you say like you had experiences with therapy so early that weren't necessarily positive, and yet you continued to pursue it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I would imagine that has to be English is tough, representative of like somebody that's committed to themselves and like, I really want to do this, just not with this person.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what, other than just having those experiences after, the ones that weren't so great, that did show me, oh, this can be a really positive experience. And I'll say that I think at first I didn't have a clear idea of what a therapist was. I think at the time there was just psychology, in my own mind. It just,
Right.
I didn't know all the differentiations between psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, and I think some of that was still being figured out since some branches of the field are relatively new. Um, and my grandfather was a psychiatrist in Mississippi and was the forerunner to a lot of things that happened there. He helped develop one of the first psychiatric hospital in Mississippi.
Wow.
So yeah, that's always been a part of my family. And I remember, just always admiring him and thought he was really interesting because he was also grew up as a poor Mississippi Delta farmer. And so he had this, like, I love gardening and the outdoors too. And so he always had this pairing that I really admired and connected with. So I think part of it for me was just, I really was drawn to just the scientific side of it at first, just the kind of, I don't hesitate to say it, the kind of the clinically detached, like I just wanted to study it. But then it was
Mm-hmm.
through the studying and then the experiential side of just being with a person. And I was like, oh, that's where the healing comes from. That's kind of like that intrinsic piece that is hard to capture in some kind of peer-reviewed article that is so compelling about this field. And it was just through that experience of it that prompted me forward to doing this specifically.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I know anyone who's ever felt connected to a peer-reviewed article. Like
Right.
academic writing is not. I don't even know why, like APA formatting exists
I
because
know.
it's a chore and a labor to read through.
Right. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
why you couldn't just write it to where people would actually want to read it and
Exactly.
access it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds like recognizing in yourself there's a way that you connect with yourself and that you can express yourself through art
Mm-hmm.
that not only could be therapeutic for you, but could be therapeutic for other people,
Yeah.
that you could lead them into that as well.
Yeah.
It requires a certain amount of self-awareness,
Yeah.
because I think that there are people who could I want to say like participate in art, but
Mm-hmm.
like there could be artists who don't have that awareness and they just create, I don't know, maybe to make money or they
Mm-hmm.
create for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And it's probably saying something that's inside of them,
Right.
but they're not actively like processing that and putting it
Right.
down.
Yeah. It's the intentionality there that makes a
Mm-hmm.
difference for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have had several like really powerful experiences with art therapy myself
Mm.
that, I mean, quite frankly, were like surprising in the moment.
Yeah.
Like, that I was not prepared to have an emotional reaction.
Right.
And I'm
Yes.
talking about something that I created.
Yes.
But just in the presenting it to the therapy group that I was in, it was this intervention where I had to write a story kind of communicating what was happening inside of me at a certain time.
Yeah.
And then I also, as a second part, had to draw a picture representing how I felt in that moment.
Yes.
So like I read the story first and just read it. I think I've said this on the show before, but like I just read it as if I was reading the news. It was very matter of fact. Like I lived through it. Here's the facts. Here's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it came time to present the picture, I picked it up off the floor laying in front of me and I went to go say something about it and I couldn't get the first word out.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yes.
And I all of a sudden, and I think if I'm looking back, I think there was fear. I think there was sadness. I think there was shame.
Mm.
But, years later, having been through clinical training and being a therapist and all that, what I realized was like it required processing on a different level to be able to do that.
Yes.
So like I had to first I guess identify how I felt, and then I had to conceptualize it using a symbol, like a picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, that exercise in and of itself is just, I mean, very significant and powerful.
Right.
And then I think presenting it, for some reason, the picture, it was more vulnerable than the story.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know if I can put my finger on why.
Yeah. I mean, you can get all into the side of it that looks at, the brain imaging and everything. I mean, essentially it's that it just, you said it taps into a different level of processing. When we tell our stories, we can become so, like, it's a story we carry around in our minds, and we can sit there and recite it, and we can say it almost in this matter of fact, almost reading from a teleprompter type of way.
And we can edit it while
Right.
doing that.
We can package it nicely for someone to consume, which is informed by our own internal messages we carry of not wanting to be too much or not wanting to seem too weird. So we create it and we present it that way. So I kind of tell people, you can tell your story, and that's like telling me the recipe to something you're going to make, or we can make it. And that's where, the art piece comes in, or the experiential or expressive side of it comes in, because it's one thing to, read a recipe or to recite what your workout routine is going to be. It's another thing to do it or make it. And so that's where that experiential work makes a difference, and where that art therapy work makes a difference. You actually get to see what's happening there versus just tell it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Connecting and healing is incredibly important. This is the way that I notice the gifts in myself are able to do that. We all can show up in different ways with that ability to heal and connect and create reparative scenarios. And this just happens to be, for whatever reason, my brain and body were designed for, like, this works, and I'm good at it, and I do it, and I've chosen it. Other people have different avenues of healing. I mean, you've got chefs, they can, create meals that bring people together. There's all kinds of different ways in order to create healing and connection. This just always made sense to me. I understand it. I can do it. It feels very natural. I feel rejuvenated by it most of the time. So
there's some element of fulfillment that you find in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I find it very fulfilling. And particularly this type of, therapy in the one-on-one sense. And I find it to be a deeply creative experience. I did time doing social work and case management. That taps me out and burns me out. There are people meant for that and who can do it well. I have several friends who do that, and they're rejuvenated by it, and it burned me out. So this speaks to me and who I am, and allows me to be much more creatively attuned to the person sitting in front of me.
Just recognizing that in yourself, you feel fulfilled and energized from that connection, and even you feel a connection inside of yourself from your experience.
Absolutely.
Your I guess like gifting and talent, and the ways that you express yourself, and the way you like to connect with others. To notice that connection inside of yourself between those things and how it can benefit other people is like nothing short of magical. Like the fact that I'm still kind of like surprised all the time that I get to do this thing as a job.
I know.
That helps people, and at the end of the day, even if it's the worst day, I can feel like I've made some difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of like a little like a rocket boost kind of.
Yeah. It feels, at times it feels a little bit, existential, not in a dark way, but in a, it can either be, it's like, okay, maybe there was a real clear process that happened with a client. And, if I do EMDR, there's a very clear process. Other days, it just might be the fact that I was another person that they talked to. And I don't know what that looks like in the big picture of their life, but it's happened. And I worked for a while at the women's prison. I was the therapist for the SEG unit there, the folks that are on 24 or 23-hour lockdown, anyone that's on death row or in life. And
Wow.
I had to completely shift how I did therapy for someone who's, in there for life or on death row, because it's different. You're entering this different world. There's not this day that they're going to, one day be, back at their job. Sometimes it's just being in a relationship with someone for an hour a day, and that's it. Sometimes that is the purpose. And so I've seen so many different facets, where the idea of what therapy is shifts and changes. But ultimately for me, it's about connection and connecting with a person.
Yeah. And I think that's the basis of most healing that we can have in life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because most hurt comes from other people.
Yes.
And so most healing is going to come from them as well.
Yes.
And even if it's not an interpersonal relationship, I think an intrapersonal, like your relationship with yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's healing that can be done there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about a movie. So what movie did you bring for us to talk about?
So I brought Network.
Network.
Yeah. It's an older film. Filmed
It is.
in the 70s, 76.
Officially the oldest movie that we'll have covered. Like before this, it was Terms of Endearment, which came out in 1988.
Yeah.
And now we got Network.
Yeah. That was my second choice.
It was. Also, maybe the most, I guess the word might be prestigious film that we've covered.
Okay.
Like, I don't know the Oscar count on every movie that we've covered on the show, but this has 4.
Yeah.
That's pretty big.
Yeah.
So what was it about this movie that made you want to pick it?
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons, and it's layered, because that's just how I do things. I look at all the layers and the intersections of all the pieces. So part of it was because when I first watched the movie, I'd heard of it. I'd definitely heard, references to it. But when I first watched the movie, it made me really uncomfortable. There's so many angry diatribes in it. Lots of yelling. Lots of tense scenes, which is in part, why I picked it as well, because there were tense scenes in the other movie that I had first mentioned that were reflective in similar ways. But part of it was that, and for me, sitting with anger is something that for me personally isn't comfortable. And so to watch this entire movie that reflected ideologies that I align with and kind of understand, but just to hear the anger so visceral in it was challenging for me. So it was a tough movie to sit through in that way. But the other part was just, how, you look at when this movie was made, yet so many of the themes are mirrored time and time again, decade after decade. That's probably not the first time that theme was mirrored in the late 70s. And, certainly we're seeing a lot of those themes again currently. So for me, there was a layer of it that there's a timelessness to it, as far as at least in our modern centuries, and just kind of the effect that has on people, and then there's also the layer of how a particular character's mental health was, basically capitalized on and taken advantage of, and how the dehumanization of that in a way. So there were a few layers there, and then there's just a few certain scenes and characters that I found pretty poignant, and just very human. So there, particularly the scene with, trying to remember, kind of think sequentially, where the character Max Shoemaker and
who was the head of the news
yes, yeah,
division or program or something like that.
Yes, yeah. When he decides to leave his wife after he starts having an affair with Diana Christensen, who's played by Faye Dunaway's character. Who's played by Faye Dunaway. When he decides to leave his wife for her, and just that whole scene right there and how that played out, I just imagine that that's happened in so many living rooms and kitchens and bedrooms, and some version of that, and just the way that the emotion is expressed and the pain is expressed in that feels very raw and real in some ways. Especially when I think about, I have a niche of clientele that are, men, in their more middle age, part of life, and just, kind of seeing the culture that they've grown up in and been pressured to acclimate to, and the issues and problems that arise out of that. It's just a piece to me that interests me.
Yeah, I mean, my primary population that I work with are men with addiction issues, and
Yeah,
time
same.
and time and time and time
Yep.
and time and time again, I run up against, there's some message inside of them that has not allowed them to be in touch with their anger.
Yes. Yeah.
They've been told that anger is, not something that is okay to feel.
Yeah.
And so, in an effort to suppress it time and time and time again, it ends up, them becoming so afraid that it comes out as rage.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think I really don't know, watching this movie, if it's so much that people, which, I mean, the most famous line in the movie, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore."
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's like the movie has so many representations of anger, because there were times where I felt like some of the choices that the actors made, it was just chewing the scenery. Like the part where let's go to IMDb. Oh man. One of these days I'll know character names.
It's all right. I still can't remember some of them because I'm always so focused on
Yeah.
faces and lines.
So like
Yeah.
Ned Beatty, who plays Arthur Jensen, who I think is like the head of the network or the head of corporate or something, he brings in Howard Beale.
Mm-hmm.
So like the basic story of the movie is, it starts out in like a newsroom. Howard Beale is the anchor. He is announcing that he's retiring, but what's really happening is the ratings are low.
Yeah.
And they want to get him off so the ratings, they can get somebody else in so the ratings can go back up. So he's announcing that he is going to retire, and like nobody in the control room is paying attention, because as he's announcing it, he says, "And a week from now, I'm going to commit suicide live on air."
Mm-hmm.
And then like, I don't know, a minute and a half later, somebody comes running in the room like, "Hey, did you guys just hear what he said?" And they're like, "What? No, we weren't paying attention."
Yes.
So then he gets in trouble for it, and the head of the news program or the news division, whichever it is, the guy that you described earlier, Max Shoemaker,
Yeah.
he's like, "Listen, Howard's a big deal. He's been here forever. We need to give him a chance to go on the air, apologize, and leave like on good terms."
Yeah.
So he comes on the air and he's going to apologize, but then he takes another hard right turn and says, "Listen, I said what I said because I just ran out of the ability to bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I am done with it. Like I can't do it anymore, so I'm just telling the truth." So they like basically, they go in physically and like remove him from the air while still filming him and broadcasting it.
Right.
And then they realize that the ratings ran up during that I don't know, scene, that event, whatever you want to call it. So then that's when Faye Dunaway's character Diana comes in, because she's like, I think she's in like an entertainment division of the channel or something, but she starts pitching, "Let's make this into a show." So they're kind of recognizing that Howard is having like a break.
Yeah.
Like something's going on in him where he is, I don't know, burnt out, dissociating. Something's not okay.
Yeah.
And they decide, let's capitalize on it. So they end up giving him a show that, after toying with it for a while, really casts and puts him in the role of like a preacher, Because, like, the set has, like, stained glass things and things like that where he basically just gets to go off on whatever it is he wants to go off on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have him back for a third time. I don't know why. Like, I don't remember the purpose of, but that's when he ends up saying his famous line, you know, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
And then the wheels of the show that they're going to design for him start moving in motion and stuff.
Yeah.
And at one point during one of his like tirades, he ends up, which I genuinely don't know how much of what he said was racist and how much was like xenophobic and how much was like based on like a weird capitalism type fear or whatever. But he ends up basically like going off on how his television network is going to be bought by a conglomerate of investors or a corporation in, I think, Saudi Arabia or something.
Yep. Yeah.
And so Ned Beatty, whose name I've already forgotten again, Arthur Jensen, he's like the head of the network. He's kind of, I guess, in charge of that deal. Obviously not a big, and Howard is telling the crowd to write the White House to stop this because we can't have people of those kinds of people owning a part of America. And so people do write and the deal goes south. And so Arthur pulls Howard into a conference room and like starts, I mean, I don't know, to say Ned Beatty starts shouting, I feel like is too little. Like that's not a big enough description of what he does.
He rages. I mean, yeah.
But he basically clues Howard into all of the happenings behind the scenes that necessitate this deal to be going on. He says some kind of line, something along the lines of like, Arabs have taken money out of this country, so it's time for them to put some back in.
Yeah. It's just
but
yeah.
Like once again, I don't know if he was angry or if they just told him to go as big as he could, because the way that he does it at some point, like, is just, it seems almost like play acting, like he not pretend acting, but like acting in a play where he's trying to hit the back of the house.
Yeah.
Because he's yelling so loud and gesturing so big that I'm like, I don't know anybody that would do that in real life.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain tirades, certain personalities might go on, especially if the spotlight's on them, and it's, there's certain types of psychoses that will bring that out of someone. But yeah, there was just particularly for this movie, and I think some of that is particular for the era that this movie was produced in. I think it's such a script heavy movie. Like you said, there's no music. There's just, it's just very script heavy, very dialogue heavy. And so part of it, I think, is just the time period it was produced in. But the other part is just, it's that dramatic flair to it. And emphasis. Yeah.
Which stylistically, so many things have changed.
Yes.
The way movies are made and the way acting is done since then. Like, I mean, before we started recording, we were talking about, movies from the late 70s. I mean, here's a quick, like, these were all movies released in 1976, the same year as this movie. Carrie, Rocky, Taxi Driver, All the President's Men, The Outlaw Josie Wales, Bad News Bears, Logan's Run.
Yeah.
Marathon Man, The Pink Panther Strikes Again. My dad used to watch that a lot when I was a kid. Another version of King Kong, like, let's see, Freaky Friday, the original.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
What else? A Star Is Born, the Chris Christopherson, Barbara Streisand version.
Yeah.
Like, this was a giant year of giant movies.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that's like, well, this is an old movie, and so it just feels different. Like, yeah, it does feel different, but it came from this era where, like, movies weren't so much, hey, throw in a couple car crashes and we got to figure out a loose plot to tie it together.
Right.
I hadn't thought about the script thing like you said about, like, even on the IMDb page, clicking on the quotes section,
Yeah.
the length of these quotes on that section
Yeah.
is giant. It's
Yes.
like everybody got monologues instead of dialogue
Yes.
in this movie.
Yeah.
And of course, like the most famous, like just the excerpt, you know, when Howard is on his, I want to say like second tirade. All I know is that first you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. My life has value, so I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, stick your head out and yell, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Yeah.
I want you to get up right now, sit up, go to your windows, open them and stick your head out and yell, I'm mad as hell as I'm not going to take this anymore. Things have got to change. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Yeah.
Then we'll figure out what to do about the depression and the inflation and the oil crisis. But first, get up out of your chairs, open the windows, stick your head out and yell and say it. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Yeah.
And what's strange is there was this weird part during that scene where I want to say Max was at his home with his wife and kids and was watching it. And I don't think that they had a good grasp on what was happening. It was almost like they were trying to decide, should we feel sorry for Howard? Should we do what he's saying? And his daughter, I think it was like, well, let's see what's going on outside. So she goes and opens a window to their apartment and people are sticking their head out their window and saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I think that's where maybe Diana had pitched to Max before that, let me make a show out of this. And Max had been resistant because, like, my friend's going to retire, leave him alone.
Right. But then once he saw that.
He was like, oh, maybe there are some dollar signs to be made from this.
Yeah.
So, like, what? And then, of course, it's just the capitalization of Howard.
Yeah.
Until they realize that, like, his new format of the show takes a dip in the ratings. And so they decide they need to make another change. So they literally have him assassinated on air.
Yeah.
By the group of people who have a show that I think that they were going to replace him with.
Yes. Yep.
Which was like a American Communist
Yes.
Party, something like that. But it's portrayed as like a Black Panther-esque.
Yes. And like,
group.
yeah, there are people that are kind of representing actual people. I mean, you know, the band of terror is called the Ecumenical Liberation Army. It's definitely a reference to things that were happening at that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I feel like this movie is like just a big giant mirror to a lot of things that are happening today. What is it that you can maybe connect from the movie? Maybe not the late 70s, but the movie to today.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out to me, or when I first watched it too, was the part where, like, in that scene you just described, where, you know, people are sticking their head out the window saying, you know, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take this anymore. You know, I think about how much that appeals to, well, if you look at current events and everything happening currently or that's been happening over the last decade or so, there are people that are mad. There are disenfranchised, marginalized groups of people that are angry. They're tired, you know, they're tired. And so then you have, you know, someone step forward, you know, speaking certain people in leadership roles in our country, and they validate those feelings and they say, yes, and then I'm going to help you do something about it. But then they are someone who is not quite, you know, maybe doesn't have actual best interest in mind and is concerned about the dollar sign and is misleading in a way. But once a group of people feels that their pain is validated and their anger is validated, you know, then that creates a connection. So then they're going to follow that leader, even to their own detriment. And so in a way, I see that it's like, okay, the danger or the slippery slope of, I don't know. I don't want to know if I want to phrase it like that, but just why and how it's so important to do what we do as therapists or as just people in community who want the best for each other and who want to work at things from a localized place. I guess that would be the way to say it, of helping heal and connect people, because there are a lot of people out there that have a lot of needs. But if someone of not sound mind, comes in, it can just create these disparaging issues that we're seeing now. Um, if that makes sense. I think I'm speaking about it in a way that makes sense. So
Kind of. And I'm recognizing that I think it would be really easy to get political, like
right.
talking about these reflections, which is not the point. And
Right.
like, because I don't think currently it really matters where you land politically. I think everybody is feeling anxiety and
Right.
anger
Yeah.
and stress. And
Yeah.
so I think maybe, it might help us to talk about, like, why is it that anger is an emotion that if we do not engage with it and understand it, could be harmful to us. Like, what is the big deal? Let me go Seinfeld. What's the big deal about anger? Like,
Yeah.
why do we need to get in touch with our anger?
Yeah. Um, well, I think you spoke to that earlier whenever, that if anger is not met with understanding and a healthy outlet, I mean, it can easily be, like you said, a lot of people are taught to be afraid of their anger. And so then it gets embodied and turns into, depressive symptoms or self-harming symptoms. And then, sometimes it can come out as rage, when put under enough pressure. That can negatively affect and impact relationships. That can, negatively impact the way someone interacts in life. It makes people more vulnerable to unhealthy relationships. And I think that's kind of where I was leaning. I mean, there is that political slant to it, but I mean, I think I was leaning more to kind of a relational view of it, is when you have people that if you have a person, I'll speak of it in like one person instead of a group of people in a way. So if you have someone who is angry or is hurt, um, and there's someone, say a healthy person comes along and listens to them and helps them, validate what they're feeling, and it helps, pave a path of healing and connection that allows that person to then finally be able to safely express their anger and work through it and channel that into ways that are not harmful, but like, allows them to seek healing or seek ways to continue to connect. That's one thing. But then it also, we want that relief so bad that the first person to come along and offer that relief, when we're in that place, we'll often cling to. And so when I say it makes people vulnerable to unhealthy attachments or connections, you may have someone, say if you are that person with, so much anger, and someone comes along that offers that soothing or soft place to land, and maybe that person isn't in a a healthy place either, and then it kind of creates a cycle of dysfunction there. So it's like when we're in touch with our anger and when we have healthy ways to express and understand it, then it allows us to make healthier, sounder choices about who we choose to connect with from a place of um, is health and a more reflective, and a deeper understanding of who we are versus just who our pain is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the framework that I come from, using like the spiritual root system, voice of the heart, anger's that message, that alert that goes off that says, I see something I believe is wrong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think right there, to engage it is to process and engage my value system.
Yeah.
Like what I believe, who I am. And I think, you mentioned to not lean into your anger, it ends up becoming depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the easiest way that I've always kind of tried to conceptualize that for clients is like, well, if I'm angry about something, but I tell myself, well, what's anything I do gonna matter? And I don't take action on my anger. And I'm not talking about like losing control.
Right. You're
Flipping
not
out and
talking about a
starting
temper
fight.
tantrum or a rage fit. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm just talking. I mean, anger can be real at something that's really big. There are kids in the world who don't have food or clean water.
Right. There's justified anger. Absolutely.
Right. Anger can be something really small. I can't believe I don't know why I just thought of this. I can't believe my Uber Eats is cold when they delivered it. Like, I mean, that's a terrible example. But like, I mean,
But in these stressful moments, sometimes it can be the thing that just sets it off. I hear that.
yeah, yeah. But like, so if I tell myself, well, what's anything that I do going to matter, that pretty soon, left unchecked, that becomes, well, what do I matter?
Yeah.
Which that's really easy to understand as depression.
Yeah.
Versus like the gift of anger, what we receive when we lean into it is passion.
Mm-hmm.
And like passion is, I see something I believe is wrong and I'm driven to change it. I'm driven to act. Passion is a directional feeling that goes out from us. Depression is a directional feeling that goes into us. It goes down into us.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people think anger is wrong, which is a funny way to say it, because they're confusing it with rage.
Exactly.
And rage is a feeling that's tied to fear, not anger.
Yes.
Because rage is all about reaction. So rage is the dog backed into the corner that snaps because it's afraid for its life. And the biggest way that I try to like conceptualize the difference between anger and rage is I say, if I'm angry about something, I can tell you what it is. I can tell you all about it because I've got the presence of thought in anger.
Yeah.
Versus in rage, I'm just pure reaction.
Yes. Yeah, it's you're moving into your brainstem fight, flight, freeze at that point, and it's yeah.
And I've told clients before that, like, those moments when you're at the house with your spouse, oh, that rhymes, with a mouse, and maybe your spouse is talking to you and inwardly, maybe not outwardly, but inwardly, you find yourself like snapping back with a really short comment. Yeah. And it feels like it's out of nowhere. 100% of the time, your spouse touched on some fear that you have. Mm-hmm. And you've gone into rage because it's your survival instinct that's kicked up. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's not a physical survival instinct because maybe you don't think that your wife like wants to harm you physically.
Right, yeah.
But, I mean, there isn't anybody that we're more vulnerable with than our primary attachment figures.
Right, yeah.
And so we have so many more levels of fear when it comes to that relationship.
Yeah.
And so if somebody that we love and that loves us touches on one of those fears, our default mode kicks in, our survival kicks in, and we go into fear, we go into rage. But that's different than anger because like there's a million things that I'm angry about that I can tell you about. I can't tell you the first reason in the moment why my rage kicks in.
Right. Yeah.
I need to like self-regulate and calm down and then like retroactively kind of like, hindsight, look backwards and then go, oh.
Yeah.
Like that trap door between my mid brain where my emotion lives and my like forebrain where my higher functioning and higher thinking and logic lives, that trap door has to open back up for me to be able to access those things to understand my fear.
Yeah. And, I use a lot of internal family systems. I know that's a clinical therapy word. But using...
It's a modality, and a modality is a way that we look at the world and understand how it and people and change happens. Yes. That's what it is.
Yeah. And kind of looking at it and that way, when we do, and this is, because I work with a lot of, men and some women, but mostly men in addiction. But that's when when you act in a place of rage, then that can trigger feelings of shame or guilt because of how you behaved, which then, triggers another part to want to just self-soothe through that, which is where a lot of the addictive behaviors come in. And just, you kind of go in that circle of acting, reacting, feeling, and to try to just not feel that shame that comes up when we behave or when those reactions come out. And so that's another important reason of of naming the anger, of being able to move to that place where you can speak about it and understand it and name it and provide outlets for it, because it can interrupt that cycle there and create
Yeah.
space for the underlying emotions that we're trying so hard to avoid because we never really had a place, and maybe we didn't have a place in life where it was safe to experience those emotions. Maybe if you did
Yeah.
grow up in a place where it wasn't safe to show your anger, you learned to just put it down because you didn't want to, be faced with the anger or rage of another family member or an attachment figure in your life. So we learn all these ways to adapt. And that's what I have found a lot with my clients, is that the way they learn to deal with their anger and rage early in life, it helped them survive a system that wasn't a healthy one. It's just whenever they try to then engage in life with healthier or different systems, even repeating some of those patterns and some of those same systems, but that's when the problems start to appear more greatly. And so going back and finding space for that anger to be understood and named and is a really helpful thing.
Yeah, I think you touched on something there that's really important. Like, even quote unquote unhealthy, sometimes I shy away from that word and say unproductive,
Okay.
coping skills were effective
Mm-hmm. Right.
because we're sitting in front of that person. They're still with us.
Right.
So, like, if a coping strategy is used to help you deal with, process, and survive the world that you're in, and you're still in that world, then, like, it worked.
Right.
But I think you get to a certain place where you start to recognize, is this thing that has helped me get through also hurting me
Yeah.
or hurting my relationships, the people that I care about? And, you mentioned a cycle, like, Patrick Carnes has the cycle of shame and addiction,
Right.
where, like, you have a feeling, you can't tolerate the tension, the anxiety, the kind of rub inside of you from that feeling. So you drop down into preoccupation,
Mm-hmm.
which it's preoccupation with the addictive substance or process or behavior.
Right.
So it's kind of like I know how to fix this and make it better. I just can't do it right now.
Mm-hmm.
So then you move from preoccupation to ritual, because every addict has a ritual. It's a way of self-hypnosis that reduces the ability of the individual to say no or stop or whatever when it comes time to act out. You move from ritual to the acting out behavior, which is the thing. That's the substance, the process, the behavior. And that is the thing that you use to alleviate the anxiety, that you alleviate the feeling. But what happens is it only works for a few moments.
Mm-hmm.
And once you act out, you move into shame and despair because of the acting out. And guess what? That's a feeling that you can't tolerate. And so that completes the circle and you move back into preoccupation, and it's a
Right.
cycle that keeps happening.
Right.
And so the primary way, and 12 steps supports this, as well as like several like addiction recovery models that
Mm-hmm.
aren't 12-step related, but it's to understand, why do I reach for the thing?
Yeah. Yes.
So it requires you to process the emotion, to process the feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and it requires you to get in touch with it. And so, like, if somebody is struggling with not being attached to their anger, and I had a client earlier this year who, like, my confrontation with him was, do you go along to get along?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you always give in to the wants, the desires, the needs, the longings of your partner at the expense of yourself?
Yeah.
And then develop resentment and anger from that,
Yeah.
you know? And that was the case, you know? And so for him, which unfortunately he decided to not continue therapy, but for him, the work would have been to get angry, to get in
Right.
touch. Well, not even get angry, because he was angry. He just wasn't in touch with it.
Right. Yeah. To
So to get in touch,
understand the underneath of it.
yeah, and to articulate it
Yeah.
in a way that communicates, because every feeling leads to a need. So in a way that articulates the needs that he had as a person,
Yeah.
rather than acquiescing to those of his partner, because that's basically a sign of self, how you value yourself. It's a
Right.
way of saying, like, you're more important than me, which is
Right.
really acceptable way of saying, I don't really like me. I don't think much of myself.
Right. Yeah. And that, kind of all of that makes me think, even like leading back to or stemming back to this movie and why, kind of it leads to the why therapy. Why did I choose this movie? Growing up in a household where there was a lot of rage and there wasn't a lot of, places for productive anger and ways to stay healthily connected with caregivers at the same time as you express anger or hurt or whatever it comes up. It reminds me in this movie, um, you see a lot of, and I think there's something about that too, where it's tough to know where you align with. There's not this clear good guy, bad guy thing. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's just these emotions that show up, and you're kind of wrestling with, like, well, is this a justified anger? Like, where is this going? What is this person doing with their anger here? Why are people reacting this way? And so it's just interesting, kind of like following this chain of events that happens around this particular man and his mental breakdown and his anger, and which underneath that is just kind of like that disconnect from his purpose and his sense of self and his self-esteem. That whole thing, you get very analytical with it. But I saw the film more as allegory, more so than literal in that way, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
that layer is what I connected with the most in it. And I saw a lot of that pattern that you were just talking about how, okay, so here's this anger that's repressed or that is expressed. Here's this person saying, I'm going to kill myself on live TV. And then you've got the people in the control room. No one's really paying attention. There's like one person kind of catching on. And then instead of doing the thing where someone hears that and it's like, wow, this person is suffering. How can we get them some help? Then it's like, it goes to that place of like, oh, how can we just stop it, or how can we make this something that feels better to us, which is basically lining our wallets and then making,
How do we capitalize?
yes, yeah. And so it kind of reminds me of that cycle you were just referencing of just like, okay, how do I not feel the thing and just either numb out, escape from, dissociate from, whatever it is. And then at the end of the movie, it does come to an awful head, which kind of to me is, it's dark, but at the same time, that's also allegory to me of like, well, this is, that's what happens sometimes. Maybe not always to that literal of a way, but whenever usually something catastrophic happens in our life if we engage in that cycle long enough. In the addiction world, you hit rock bottom, you have overdoses, you have suicide attempts, and all of these things, or relationships dissolve, people are lost. So there is usually pretty detrimental things that happen whenever those cycles aren't broken.
The movie ends with Howard's death on the air from assassination.
Yeah.
There's a movie that came out in 2016 that it's based on a true story. It's called Christine.
Mm-hmm.
And it is about Christine Chubbuck,
Yes.
who was a news anchor, I guess, who did commit suicide live on air.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it was in Florida.
Yes, it was.
But I'm looking right now to see if I can find out when that true thing happened.
It was in 1974, so it was a couple
Okay.
years before Network came
So
out.
and I can't imagine that didn't factor into Network, because I mean Network is, everything I read about it after I watched it is a satire. Like it's
Mm,
it's commentary on something.
yeah.
And even the last scene of the movie, after Howard's shot, he's laying on the ground. There are 4 television monitors that
Yeah.
fill the screen. One of which, I think, maybe 3 of which at the beginning start with the scene of his body,
Yes.
and then like 3 of them move on to commercials, and there's just all this chatter from these commercials, and the camera kind of slowly pans in until it ends on just the picture of Howard and like silence.
Yeah.
And it's just, here's this thing that's happened that's been crowded out by all this noise.
Yes.
Which I feel like right now, in the current environment that we're in with social distancing,
Yeah.
there's a lot of noise. Only, at least in me, in my person, if I lean towards the noise, I don't feel anger, I feel fear.
Yeah.
And I am very well aware now, which I was not 2 weeks ago, that I have to be mindful about the consumption that I partake in
Yeah.
media, and be it social media or like news and such.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because since so much that we're in right now is unknown and uncertain, the only thing that we're left with is fear.
Right.
Because this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Like, I've said it a million times that in almost any other thing that we can go through as people, we have so many resources to try to figure out what's the next right thing to do.
Yeah.
Usually the last resource is calling up our parents or calling up somebody that's older to say, what did you do when you went through this?
Yeah.
And we don't even have that with this.
Right. Yeah. Because
Nobody's been through this.
the last time something like this happened was so long ago. So much has
I thi-
changed since that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 1918 was the Spanish flu, and I
Right.
literally think there's one person on Earth that was alive then,
Right. Yeah.
but they were probably so young that they have no recollection of it. But like, so I'm trying to be as mindful as I can about the media that I consume now,
Yeah.
and I'm even doing a few days at a time fasting from it,
Yeah.
because I think that like right now, I like one of my addictions that's manifesting is CNN, and like and not even like putting it on the channel, but watching the YouTube clips, because
Yeah.
it's all like one story, so I can just do 10 minutes or 12 minutes at a time. But the problem is that there's no answers. It's
Yeah.
all just, here's all the
Chatter.
things that are going wrong. Here's all the ways that we don't know what to do.
Yes.
And so I think for me right now, recognizing the noise and recognizing my own anger at it, and then learning how to process. So what is it that I am seeing that I think is wrong?
Yeah.
That's the anger. So I watching it and going, well, it seems like a lot of people are talking to hear themselves talk. A lot of people
Yeah.
are talking to get ratings. I mean, we did have, and I think I can say this without being political, but, the president did say, the ratings for my afternoon news
Yeah.
conferences are bachelor finale level, was his,
Yeah.
I think, quote.
Yeah.
And so even the person that we turn to for information, guidance, and leadership in this is recognizing, I have, this situation has the ability to get eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think for me, like I look at that, not what he said, but I look at the sensationalism of it all,
Yeah.
and it makes me angry.
Yeah.
because I don't feel like we're getting good answers. And so being mindful about how I consume media right now means being mindful about the amount that I consume. So maybe
Mhm.
it's not wise for me to watch 4 hours of CNN one day
Mhm. Yeah.
while also being on the news feed on my phone and reading articles,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and not just the amount, but also the source.
Yeah.
So, maybe instead of going to CNN, I go to the CDC website or the
Yeah.
WHO website, or I don't know. Those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head. But
Yeah. So, you spoke to you spoke into something that I think really touched on what I was trying to say earlier. And it is tough to talk about current events right now without it's, I don't want to make it politicized, but at the same time, that it's like hard to talk about it in that context. But I think the way that you talked about it or just mentioned it spoke to more of that dynamic of what I was seeing, and especially highlighting that last scene in the movie where we're right now being asked, globally to slow down and stop. And we're seeing, I've been talking to a lot of my clients that are my who I see for trauma, and I do EMDR with them, which is a type of trauma therapy. And one of the things that we talk about in that modality is, what is your answer? And your answer being like, what do you do when you're in that place of stress that like sends you over the edge? And I think one of the answers that some people that I work with, it's like you start talking a lot. You start talking and you make a lot more noise. You stay busy. You kind of overindulge in just like the talking and busyness of life. And so I think some of that, even like with all the chatter that's happening in news, it's like people are just trying to talk to figure out what to do with their stress and anxiety and fear right now. And it's a lot to ask people just to sit with that, just to look, okay, this is what you see whenever we start to slow down. This is what you see, such as, for example, that image of, Howard Beale's body there. And, it's, we're kind of being asked to like face and look at this hurt, this big global pain that is being felt right now. And I think it's a challenge. I think and there's so much, this could go so many different ways, but I think we can collectively as humans, steer this ship in a direction. It's just right now we have to look at it. It's like, how do we look at it and name what is there? Name the fears, name the pain, name what's happening so that we know which way to go. Because without it, we're just going to keep distracting ourselves. We're just going to go back to the thing that was causing a lot of the pain to begin with.
yeah, I think the language and naming it's so important. I think it
Yeah.
makes it more real to put it out in front of us, to externalize it.
Yeah.
And I think because feelings lead to needs, I
Yes.
don't I don't think that we can ever as a species make progress on anything until we can name what's going on inside of ourselves in
Yes.
regards to it.
Yes.
And I think especially with something like this, because it was really easy after 9/11 to point a finger and say, that's the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
But with something like a pandemic, it's not a person. It's not
Right.
malicious. It's not, somebody that had an ill intention for us or any other part of the world. It's a biological contagion
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't have forethought enough to attack any group of people in particular.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I think that fear, no matter what the fear is, always at its base has some level of feeling out of control,
Yes.
feeling
Yeah.
like you don't have agency, you don't have influence, you don't have the ability to determine what happens to you in a
Yeah.
situation. And I think that the natural human response to fear is first, like our default response is to try to take some measure of control.
Yes.
Now, sometimes you try to take some measure of control in the situation that's related to what the fear is of. Sometimes you try to take it in another area that you have the ability to take control in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that until our society can say, oh my gosh, we're so afraid of this thing that we're willing to do whatever it takes, I don't think we're going to make much progress.
Right. Yeah. And in a more collective, and it's so interesting too, the parallels. I mean, I've worked in a lot of recovery agencies and I've done a lot of 12-step work with people. And I was talking to someone the other day, a good friend who has been, who's very open with their recovery and has been through a lot of work and has been through, a long 4-month program. And he's like, it feels like the earth just put us all in rehab and is saying, sit, don't worry about your job. Don't worry about any of that. You can't worry about it. Sorry. You got to sit there and not work and just think about everything. And so I was like, I could see that. And then, it just, of course you can go into the whole other area of just, what this experience is like for someone with means and with wealth and ability and other people who don't have, a safe home to go to. That's a whole other, dovetail in that direction. But just in that kind of initial piece of like, no, like we're kind of being asked to just stop and consider, the collective, so to speak, and consider what is best for the health and well-being of this, world that we all inhabit. And it's not pretty. It's not pretty to look at the underbelly. And I think it is interesting to see what happens because it is, like a virus that doesn't have a consciousness to decide on who it's going to hurt. It's just there. But yeah, I think emotions in general are like that. I mean, I talk a lot about with clients, like emotions are a universal language. We may have different words to describe them in different languages, but across human experience, we all have the capacity to feel all of those ranges pretty much, and in a generalized sense. And so we're all seeing that we're all kind of looking at the ways that we've been conditioned as individuals, as cultures, as society to respond to fear. We're seeing in different ways, different leaders around the world, different, people just are responding in these different ways. And we're seeing what works, what doesn't work, and all the in between. And then there's a whole lot of waiting as well.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like we've all been put in timeout.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there anything from the movie that you'd like to touch on before we move on?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like I could pick any one thing and dig more into it, but right now I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
It is a dense movie.
It is. I know there's like so many layers, and I feel like I could easily just go into so many rabbit trails. So I've got to just stay focused on that one thing. And I kind of like where we ended up with that. I think it's relevant, and I think it was easy to kind of steer, or not. I don't know if easy is a word, but we were able to steer it out of becoming such like a political thing, which it doesn't need to be. But it's it's global. Yeah, but I think it overlays pretty well with a lot of the themes from the movie, at least from what I can see.
Yeah. So let's shift into, I wonder if you can tell me something that your clients have taught you.
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is going back even to that piece about emotion being a universal language, is that, and I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. You can edit this down as needed, but not in this whole everybody's the same, no one's different type of way, but having worked with everyone from folks experiencing homelessness to folks in prison to folks who are multi-million recording artists, I've seen a cross section of a lot of parts of society, and pain is pain, healing is healing, relationships are relationships. Yes, there are so many intersecting factors that are absolutely worth considering when working with each individual. But in general, when it comes down to connection and relationship, we all have the same basic needs there. It may look different. The language may shift a little bit from person to person, but at the end of the day, we all need connection and belonging, safety and security, um, and the ability to be autonomous and self-expressive with our purpose. And, I always end up coming back to that with each person that I see. And that, even on the days when I get filled with imposter syndrome and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? I don't, who am I? Why am I doing this for, it's like being reminded of that. It's like, oh, that's why. It's just to be able to even show someone that that's what they need. And that feels, it feels good.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, I get imposter syndrome as well. And I think that the thing that helps me the most is in those moments to do a bit of a, actually, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if this is a reframe, but just to remember that regardless of if I'm impersonating or impostoring or whatever, I'm a person who received a gift who's trying to give it away.
Exactly. Yes.
That's
Like,
all I'm doing.
yep. Yeah, there was a
And
day when someone showed me that I needed connection, and that was a healing moment for me. And all I want to do is, find a way to effectively transfer that to someone else.
yeah, and whether I feel like I'm um deserving or capable or whatnot,
Yeah.
I'm a person that received a gift that's trying to give it away, and it I am equipped because I did go through a program and get,
Right.
certified by a state to be able to do it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
if I can like say those things out loud, then it always brings me back to a place where I realize, oh, hello, shame.
Right.
That's just you. That's just
It's
you
my
trying to poke your
stuff.
head up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's when us therapists call our own therapists and make an
That's true.
appointment. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what this is just shaken out to be, I think, my favorite question to ask guests right now because of this climate that we're in. But what's something that you do to take care of yourself?
So in pre whatever this is days, it would be I think the answer would be to spend a lot of time with, friends and people that I consider to be, just the most supportive people in my life that I feel connected to, that remind me of who I am and can mirror back to me the things that I see. And I still find ways to do that, lots of talking on the phone, and it's shifted that for sure. Um, but it's also helped shift, oh, who am I wanting to connect to right now? It's not necessarily the people I thought I would want to connect to. Well, that's been a surprising piece,
Oh,
there.
interesting.
Yeah. And not necessarily that there are people that I'm like, oh, I don't want to connect with them, but it's just like, wow, who are we finding to be the most supportive in this interesting time? The other, I just spend as much time outside as possible right now. I'm
Hmm.
grateful for, of all that's happening right now. At least we've had, several days in a row of really beautiful weather. It's made me stop and, I used to spend a lot of time just appreciating small things. And as life over the years, especially with a young child, has gotten busier, it's harder to find those moments. So this has been, just reminding myself to slow down and, spend an endless, like today I took my daughter to, this little private creek out near a farm that I lived near, at one time. And we just, no timeline, just spent the time at the creek. And that's been really helpful. Spending time outside and connecting with people who are important.
So, I mean, I'm hearing a big presence of like leaning into the here and now
Yes. Yeah.
because I think that like, one common quality of anxiety, no matter what the source of the anxiety is that anxiety is always future focused.
Right.
And inevitably, that requires us to dissociate our mind from our body
Right.
and
Yes.
our to allow our mind to go somewhere out there in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, versus, remaining grounded in the present, which is it's a principle of recovery, but it's also like, we can't have agency or control or effect about anything in the future because the future is a concept that doesn't exist.
Right.
And so how can you do anything about something that doesn't exist?
Right. Yeah.
And if we can get ourselves back into our bodies and stay grounded, then we can have effect.
Yes.
And so just hearing you describe the time with your daughter at a creek, that's very here and now. That's very appreciating the present and remaining present with the people that you care about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't care who you are. That's medicine for anybody's soul.
Right. It is. And that's the thing that I love about sometimes this work and everything is that for some of the most healing stuff is accessible to almost anyone. It's just a pause in a day, 5 minutes, even less than 5 minutes is accessible to most people.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helps you to realize that, and I'm so hesitant to even say this because I'm recognizing my own privilege, but like,
right, I know.
It helps you realize like that you are enough and that you have so much of what you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the present and in the moment. And I hope, I don't mean that to speak to physical needs.
Right. Yes.
Like
because there's undeniably
shelter.
issues around that for many marginalized groups of people, for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't mean it to speak to that, but what I mean it to speak to the things that you mentioned earlier: connection, relationship, peace, things like that.
Yeah.
So let's say that somebody was listening to us today and they just feel like they would be able to connect with you and would love to see you as a client. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. The best way would be to probably email me or call me. I can spell out my email address here.
Do it. We'll drop it in the show notes, but do it.
Yeah. It's Lauren Russell Counseling, all one word, @gmail.com.
And you've also got a great website.
Yes, I do have a website, which is, I remember, it's laurenrussellcounseling.com.
It is, yeah.
Yes. Okay. I was like, I don't even remember my own website name. That's cool. Awesome. So
I get afraid, which I always doubt my ability to spell, but I get afraid every time I am spelling the word counseling, which, talk about websites. Mine's Mount Sparrow Counseling. I'm always afraid I'm going to spell counseling wrong, and people are going to be like, isn't that the thing you do that you don't know how to spell it?
I know. It's like, yes, that's not the point. Yeah.
I'm
not a linguist.
I'm not an English major.
Right.
Yeah. So reaching out to you via email and also the website, great ways to get in touch with you. Anything else you want to let the folks know about?
Right now, obviously this isn't long-standing, as far as, who knows? Again, back to, we don't know what the future is going to be. But right now, I'm taking new clients. Everything is telehealth right now, which I think most therapists are doing that at this time. But just in any way that can be support, I'm there.
Yeah. What's your general read on how clients are experiencing telehealth?
I would say for the most part that, considering this is a global experience, most people are pretty understanding and they get it. I think if they're wanting to do the work, then they're showing up and doing the work. I think, there are some people that, granted, I think I'm upfront and transparent. Like, no, this isn't the same as in person. It's not, but it's what we've got right now. So I found that most people that are continuing with it are just kind of accepting it as is. It's different than in person, but it's better than not. So,
and I've even had clients that have said, they had reservations, but they chose to try it once.
Yeah.
And I always try to check in at the end. Hey, how was this for you? And they're like, this was great. Like, this wasn't, obviously it's not option A, but it
Yeah.
was not as bad as I thought. And I think, I still feel connected, and so I mean, I would encourage anybody out there who maybe is hesitant to pursue therapy right now, be it in a new way or to maybe continue it with your therapist over telehealth. I just encourage you to try it. Give it a
Mhm.
shot.
Yeah.
Because I think
Definitely.
you'll be surprised at how effective it can be.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for coming and being on the show. I appreciate you so much, and I just hope that you and your family are just staying happy and healthy and all of the stuff in
Yeah.
social distancing.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great. I'm glad to be here. It's been good.
Hey, everybody. I'm sure that you may have noticed that this episode and a few before it have come out a little later on Thursdays. Typically, the episodes drop at 6 a.m. Central Standard Time. But this one is coming out closer to 6 or 7 p.m. And I've had a couple before this that have come out around the same time. And, hey, just to be transparent, like sometimes days are really easy in social distancing, and sometimes days are really hard. And especially sometimes days can be really hard, kind of cycling between modes in, like personal mode where my wife Leanne and I are both here at the house all the time together now, and therapist mode, wherein I am doing all of my sessions with my clients from my desk that currently sits in our living room using telehealth resources, and podcast host mode, which I do all of the podcast interviews and editing and assembling of the show and promotion and all of that from that same desk. And there are some days where I put on all three hats, and there are some days where I put on two out of the three. And, there are days like yesterday and today where for various reasons, it's tough to cycle between those modes. And so, this episode is coming out a little later in the day because I had to prioritize personal mode and therapist mode over podcast mode. And I hope you understand that. It's of course my goal to create and release the podcast as a resource to help you engage with mental health and relationships in a way that's easily understandable and accessible. But it's also my goal, and quite frankly, this goal I try to prioritize above the previous goal. It's my goal to be the best person that I can be the best husband that I can be the best friend that I can be. And so I am going to always strive to prioritize that over both my therapist role and my podcast host role. And, right now we are in social distancing times, and uh, it's it's sometimes difficult to do that, but it still bears trying. And so I guess I just want to say thanks for understanding. Um, and also, uh, you know, I still am committed to this and want to release it as a resource. So there may be a couple of release days. I'll tell you this. So far, I haven't missed a release day for Thursdays. So there may be a release day where it comes out a little later in the day. There may be a release day when it comes out on time in the morning. But either way, I'm just so thankful that this thing that I've been working on has been embraced, and that it's been shared, and I'm just so thankful and excited. So thank you so much. I'm not sure where you are in the world. I'm not sure how you're feeling right now, but I want to tell you this. No matter what the current circumstances are, if today that you're listening to this, you are experiencing social distancing, or if you have found this recording at some time in the future where the world is set free to wander about as it wants, I want you to know this. Your worth as a human being is not determined by what you do. Your worth as a human being is not determined by who you know and what they think of you. Your worth as a human being is determined by the fact that you are a human being. And it is determined by how and what you think about yourself. And so I want you right today, whatever day it is that you're listening to this, to just stop and take a moment to reflect on where you're at and where you've been. And I want you to take a moment and decide with intention where you want to go for the rest of the day, and then go after it. And the whole time that you're doing that, I want you to know that the world and me are here cheering you on. This world is a better place because you're in it. That is a fact. The world is a better place because listening to this right now, the world is a better place because you are in it. We are so thankful that you're here, and we're so excited that you're going to be here tomorrow. So I want you to know you are appreciated, especially by me. Probably not especially by me, because there's probably people that you're closer to in real life than me, but certainly by me. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.